They sent her to the ranch as a joke, a cruel bet to see how long the timid girl would last before the town's most dangerous man broke her spirit. But what started as mockery would become the story no one saw coming. Abigail Carter, the invisible girl everyone dismissed, was about to face Caleb Vance, the rancher whose rage had driven grown men from his land. By sunset, everything would change. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The morning Abigail Carter's life changed forever. Started the same way every morning had for the past 3 years, with laughter that wasn't meant to include her. Look at her, scrubbing like her life depends on it. Margaret's voice cut through the cramped kitchen of the boarding house, sharp enough to draw blood. As if making the floor shine will make anyone notice her. The other girls giggled. They always did. Abigail kept her head down, her hands moving in steady circles across the wooden planks, the brush worn smooth from years of use. The water in her bucket had gone cold an hour ago, but she didn't stop. Stopping meant looking up. Looking up meant seeing their faces, and seeing their faces meant remembering that she was the joke that never got old. I heard Mrs. Brennan say if Abigail doesn't find work by the end of the week, she's out, Sarah whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. No money means no bed. Those are the rules. Where would she even go? Margaret leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smile playing at her lips. Who'd want her? Abigail's hands stilled for just a moment. The question hung in the air like smoke, and she hated that she didn't have an answer. She was 22 years old and had nothing. No family, no prospects, no particular skill that set her apart from any other unwanted girl in this forgotten corner of town. The boarding house tolerated her because she worked harder than anyone else, asked for nothing, and made herself so small that most days people forgot she existed. That was survival. That was all she knew. I have an idea, Margaret said suddenly, her voice taking on that particular tone that made Abigail's stomach drop. You know who's always looking for workers? The kitchen went quiet except for the tick of the old clock on the wall. Caleb Vance. Someone gasped. Sarah's eyes went wide. Margaret, no. That's perfect, Margaret finished, her smile widening. He goes through workers faster than Mrs. Brennan goes through her brandy. Strong men. Men who know which end of a shovel goes in the ground. And they still leave. She paused, letting that sink in. Imagine what he'd do with her. Abigail finally looked up. Margaret's face was alight with something that wasn't quite cruelty, but was close enough to taste the same. It was entertainment. Abigail was entertainment. You can't be serious, another girl said, but she was already laughing. He'd eat her alive. Exactly, Margaret said. But think about it. If she actually goes, if she actually shows up at Caleb Vance's ranch, asking for work, that's the funniest thing that'll happen in this town all year. And if by some miracle he doesn't throw her off his land in the first 5 minutes, well, then she's got a job. Problem solved. Abigail's hands had gone numb. She knew the name Caleb Vance the way everyone in town knew it, whispered in warning, spoken with a certain careful respect that was really just fear dressed up in Sunday clothes. He owned the largest ranch in the county, worked it alone since his father died, and had a reputation that kept most people on the other side of the road when they saw him coming. Men had walked off his property with stories. He was unpredictable, violent, the kind of man who broke things when he was angry, and he was angry most of the time. Just last month, Tom Bradley had come back from a single day of work at the Vance Ranch with a black eye and a promise to never return. When asked what happened, Tom had just shaken his head and said, "Some men aren't meant to be worked for. He's one of them." I don't think, Abigail started, her voice so quiet it barely registered. You don't think what? Margaret crossed the room in 3 quick steps, crouching down so they were eye level. You don't think you were desperate enough? Because from where I'm standing, you've got about 4 days before Mrs. Brennan puts your things on the street. You don't think you're capable? Well, that's probably true. But here's the thing, Abigail. This is the only option you've got that doesn't end with you sleeping in an alley. The words hit like fists. Margaret wasn't wrong. The boarding house had rules, and the most important one was simple: pay or leave. Abigail had been scraping by on odd jobs, mending clothes, cleaning, running errands, but the work had dried up. The town wasn't big enough to need her, and the people in it had made clear she wasn't valuable enough to keep around out of charity. I'll go with you, Sarah offered suddenly. then immediately looked like she regretted it when Margaret's gaze swung toward her. I mean, to show you where it is, not to stay, just to, you know, point you in the right direction. How generous, Margaret said dryly. Fine. Tomorrow morning, dawn. That's when he starts work, so that's when you show up. Dress practical. And Abigail? She stood, brushing invisible dirt from her skirt. Try not to cry when he yells at you. It's unbecoming. The laughter followed Abigail up the stairs to the tiny room she shared with two other girls. It followed her through a sleepless night where every creak of the old house sounded like the future closing in. It followed her into the cold gray light of morning when Sarah knocked on her door, already dressed, her face a mixture of excitement and guilt. Ready? Sarah asked. Abigail wasn't, but she nodded anyway. The walk to the Vance Ranch took 40 minutes on foot, following a dirt road that wound through empty fields and past the skeleton of an old church that had burned down before Abigail was born. Sarah talked the whole way, filling the silence with nervous chatter about nothing. The weather, Mrs. Brennan's new hat, the rumor that the general store might start carrying fabric from back east. Abigail barely heard her. Her mind was stuck on a loop, playing out every possible version of the next hour. In most of them, she didn't make it past the front gate. In some, she didn't even make it that far. That's it, Sarah said finally, stopping so abruptly that Abigail almost walked into her. The Vance Ranch spread out before them like something out of a different world. The main house was 2 stories of weathered wood that had probably been white once but had faded to the color of old bones. A barn stood off to the left, bigger than any building Abigail had ever been inside, its doors hanging open like a mouth. Fences stretched in every direction, some intact, some leaning at angles that suggested they'd been forgotten. There were animals, horses in a distant pasture, chickens scratching near the house, but the place had a feeling of emptiness to it, like it was meant for more people than it held. I'll wait here, Sarah said quickly. You just go knock on the door, or find him. He's probably already working. You're not coming? Sarah's face flushed. I said I'd show you where it was. I showed you. The rest is on you. She tried to smile, but it came out wrong. Good luck, Abigail. Really? Then she turned and started walking back the way they'd come, her steps quick, like she was afraid Abigail might ask her to stay. Abigail stood alone on the road, the morning sun just starting to burn off the night's chill. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every instinct she had screamed at her to follow Sarah, to run back to the boarding house and figure out some other way, any other way. But there wasn't another way. Margaret had been right about that much. She forced her feet to move, one step, then another. The road became a path, and the path led to a gate that was already open. No one stopped her. No one even seemed to notice she was there. She walked past the main house, following the sound of something crashing, metal on wood, violence made audible. The barn. She found him there. Caleb Vance was exactly what she'd expected and nothing like it at the same time. He was tall, taller than any man she'd ever stood near, with shoulders that strained against his work shirt and hands that looked like they could break stone. His hair was dark and too long, falling into his face as he swung an axe into the side of a wagon that was already mostly splinters. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the morning cool. His face was hard angles and set jaw, the kind of face that didn't know how to smile or had forgotten how years ago. He was destroying the wagon methodically, deliberately, like it had personally wronged him. Abigail's breath caught. She should leave. She should turn around right now and... He looked up. His eyes were the color of a storm about to break. They locked onto her, and for a moment everything stopped. The crashing, the breathing, the world itself. Who the hell are you? His voice was rough, scraped raw from disuse or anger or both. Abigail's mouth opened. No sound came out. He threw the axe down, the blade burying itself in the dirt. I asked you a question. You deaf or just stupid? The words should have hurt. They probably would have if she wasn't so terrified. She managed to shake her head. Then answer me. He took a step forward and she took one back. He noticed. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or disgust. You from town? Yes. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. They send you here? She nodded. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course they did. Let me guess. You're supposed to clean, cook, do whatever else those vultures think a woman's good for? Abigail's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to make it stop, but it didn't help. I need work. I was told you might. Told by who? The girls at the boarding house. The boarding house? He said it like he was tasting something rotten. So they sent you here as a joke, is that it? See how long the little mouse lasts before the monster eats her? She flinched at the accuracy of it. That's what I thought. He turned away from her, walking back toward the ruined wagon. Go home. Tell them it was real funny. Tell them I said to go to hell. Tell them whatever you want. Just get off my land. He picked up the axe again. Abigail didn't move. The axe came down. Wood splintered. He pulled it free, raised it again. I said get off my land. I need the work. Her voice was stronger this time. Not by much, but enough that he heard it. Enough that he stopped. He turned slowly, the axe still in his hands. You need the work. Yes. Why? Because if I don't find a job, I'll have nowhere to go. Not my problem. I know. She swallowed hard. But I'm asking anyway. They stared at each other across the space between them. Abigail could hear her pulse in her ears, could feel sweat beating at her temples despite the cold. She had never done anything like this, had never stood her ground, never pushed back, never asked for anything beyond permission to exist quietly in the corner. But she was out of corners to hide in. Caleb Vance tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. You know what they say about me in town? Yes? And you came anyway. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. You chose to walk up here instead of finding some other poor bastard to bother. So let me make this simple for you. I don't need help. I don't want help. And I sure as hell don't need some girl who looks like she'd blow away in a stiff wind trying to do work she's not built for. I'm stronger than I look. You'd have to be. He drove the axe into the wagon one more time, then left it there, the handle jutting out at an angle. Fine. You want work? Barn needs cleaning. Hasn't been touched in months. There's tools in the back corner, somewhere under all the junk. You find them, you use them, you make this place look like something other than a disaster. You don't complain, you don't ask me questions, and you don't expect conversation. I'll check at sunset. If it's done, you get paid. If it's not, you leave and don't come back. We clear? Abigail nodded. I didn't hear you. We're clear. Good. He walked past her, close enough that she could smell sawdust and sweat and something else she couldn't name. And one more thing, those girls who sent you here, they're going to ask how it went. When you tell them, make sure they know I saw right through their little game. Make sure they know exactly what I think of them. Then he was gone, walking toward the house with the kind of purpose that suggested she was already forgotten. Abigail stood in the barn entrance, looking at the chaos inside. It was worse than she'd imagined. Hay covered everything in uneven piles. Tools lay scattered across the floor like they'd been dropped mid-use and never picked up. Broken equipment leaned against walls that were thick with dust and cobwebs. There had to be years of neglect packed into this space. The smart thing would be to leave. To walk back to town and tell Margaret she'd tried, that it was impossible, that Caleb Vance was exactly as terrible as everyone said. But if she left, she had nothing, and nothing had a way of turning into less than nothing real fast. So instead, she stepped inside. The first hour was the worst. She didn't know where to start, so she started everywhere, pulling hay into piles, gathering tools she recognized and some she didn't, trying to create some kind of system out of pure chaos. Her hands weren't used to this kind of work. Within the first 30 minutes, she had blisters forming on her palms. Within an hour, one of them had popped, leaving raw skin that screamed every time she gripped something new. She didn't stop. The sun climbed higher, the barn got hotter. Dust hung in the air so thick she could taste it, could feel it coating her throat with every breath. Her dress, her only good dress, was already filthy, the hem torn where she'd caught it on a piece of broken fence. She'd sweated through it in places, and her hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in her face in tangled strands. She didn't stop. By midday, she'd cleared enough space to actually see the floor in some places. The tools were sorted by type and function, lined up against the wall where they could be found. The hay was in proper piles, ready to be moved or used or whatever it was hay was supposed to do. She'd found a broom with half its bristles missing and used it to attack the cobwebs, then the walls, then the floor. Her stomach was empty. She'd left the boarding house without breakfast, too nervous to eat, and now she was paying for it. Hunger sat in her gut like a stone, making her lightheaded every time she stood up too fast. Her hands were beyond blisters now. They were raw, bleeding in places. Each movement a small agony she'd learned to ignore. She didn't stop. The afternoon stretched on. She worked in silence. The only sounds her own breathing and the occasional noise from outside. Horses moving in their pasture, chickens clucking, once the distant sound of an axe biting into wood. Caleb was out there somewhere, doing his own work, probably not thinking about her at all. That was fine. She didn't need him to think about her. She just needed him to see what she'd done when the sun went down. By the time the light started to fade, Abigail had stopped being able to feel her hands. They moved automatically now, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought had given up. The barn was transformed. Not perfect. There was too much damage for perfect, too many years of neglect to undo in a single day. But it was clean. Ordered. The kind of place where a person could actually work instead of just fighting against the environment. She stood in the center of it, swaying slightly, and allowed herself one moment of something that might have been pride. Then the barn door opened, and Caleb Vance stepped inside. He didn't say anything at first, just walked the perimeter, his boots loud against the floor she'd swept, his eyes taking in every detail. Abigail watched him, too exhausted to be nervous anymore, too far past caring to worry about what he might say. He stopped in front of her. For a long moment he just looked at her torn dress, her bleeding hands, her face probably streaked with dirt and sweat, and who knew what else. "You did good work," he said finally. 4 words? That's all they were. 4 simple words that probably didn't mean much to him, that he'd probably said 100 times to 100 different workers over the years. But to Abigail, they were everything. Something inside her chest cracked open, some wall she'd built to protect herself from expecting anything good. And for just a second, she couldn't breathe. She nodded, not trusting her voice, not trusting herself to speak without crying. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out folded bills. "This is for today. You want to come back tomorrow? Be here at dawn. Same terms. Work hard, don't complain, don't expect conversation." He held out the money. Abigail took it with shaking hands, careful not to let the blood from her palms stain the bills. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once, then turned to leave. But he paused in the doorway, his back to her. "Those girls who sent you here, they're going to be disappointed when you come back in one piece. Probably make it worse for you." "I know. You came anyway. Like you said, I didn't have a choice." He looked back over his shoulder, and for the first time his expression wasn't quite as hard. "Yeah, I guess you didn't." Then he was gone, and Abigail was alone in the barn with her bleeding hands and her torn dress and money in her pocket that meant she'd have a bed tonight. She'd have a bed tonight. The walk back to town was long. Every step hurt, her feet, her back, her hands most of all. The sun was setting behind her, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful if she'd had the energy to notice. By the time she saw the boarding house, full dark had fallen, and lights were on in the windows. She could hear them before she even opened the door. Laughter. Loud voices. The girls were in the common room, probably waiting for her. Abigail pushed the door open. The conversation died immediately. Margaret was the first to speak. Well, look who actually came back." She stood from her chair, crossing her arms, that familiar cruel smile already forming. "Tell us everything. Did he yell? I bet he yelled. Did he throw things? Tom Bradley said he throws things." "He gave me work," Abigail said quietly. The smile faltered. "What?" "The barn needed cleaning. I cleaned it. He paid me. I'm going back tomorrow." Silence. Then Sarah laughed, high and nervous. "You're joking. You have to be joking." Abigail pulled the money from her pocket and set it on the table. The bills were slightly crumpled, and yes, there was blood on one of them, but they were real. They were proof. Margaret stared at the money like it had personally insulted her. You... He actually... I should go clean up, Abigail said. I need to be there at dawn. She walked past them, past their shocked faces and their silence, and climbed the stairs to her room. Once inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, her whole body trembling. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. For the first time in 3 years, maybe the first time in her life, she'd proven something. Not to them, not even really to Caleb Vance, to herself. Her hands throbbed, her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Tomorrow would be harder. The day after that, harder still. She knew that. She wasn't naive enough to think one day of work meant anything had really changed, but it was a start. And for someone who'd spent her whole life invisible, who'd been sent to fail as entertainment, who'd never expected to matter to anyone, a start was more than she'd ever had before. Dawn came too early and not early enough. Abigail had barely slept, her body too wrecked and her mind too loud to find any real rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the weight of the broom in her hands, heard the sound of hay scraping across wood, saw Caleb Vance's face when he'd said those 4 words that had somehow rearranged something fundamental inside her chest. You did good work. She was out the door before the other girls woke, her hands wrapped in strips of cloth she'd torn from an old petticoat. The bandages were already stained pink in places where the wounds had opened again during the night. Walking hurt less than yesterday, but not by much. Her shoulders felt like someone had beaten them with a stick, and there was a deep ache in her lower back that made every step a conscious decision to keep moving. She kept moving anyway. The ranch looked different in the early light, softer somehow, though that might have just been exhaustion playing tricks with her vision. The gate was open like before. No one was around. She made her way to the barn, half expecting Caleb to appear with new instructions, but the property was silent except for the horses and the wind moving through the long grass. She stood in the barn doorway, looking at yesterday's work. It still looked good, better than good. The floors were clear, the tools organized, the space functional. Pride tried to surface again, but she pushed it down. Pride was dangerous. Pride made you think you'd earned something, and the moment you thought that, someone came along to remind you that you hadn't. You're early. She spun around. Caleb was standing behind her, close enough that she should have heard him approach, but hadn't. He had a cup of something in his hand, coffee probably, steam rising from it in the cool air. He looked at her bandaged hands, and something crossed his face too quick to read. Barn's done, he said. Figured you'd be working the stalls today. Horses need mucking out. You know how to do that? Abigail shook her head. Course you don't. He took a drink from his cup, watching her over the rim. Stalls are out back, 6 of them. Horses are in the pasture right now, so you won't have to work around them. There's a wheelbarrow, a shovel, and a pitchfork. You shovel out the old hay and the shit, dump it in the compost pile past the fence, bring in fresh hay from the stack by the door. Each stall needs to be down to bare floor before you put new bedding in. Questions? Where's the compost pile? Follow the smell. He finished his coffee and turned to leave, then paused. There's water pump by the back of the barn. You get thirsty? Use it. You feel like you're going to pass out. Sit down before you fall down. I don't need you cracking your skull open on my property. Okay. He looked at her for another moment, like he was trying to figure out if she was actually going to make it through the day or if she was just good at pretending. Then he walked away without another word. Abigail found the stalls, found the wheelbarrow and the tools, found out very quickly that mucking out a horse stall was nothing like cleaning a barn floor. The smell hit her first, not just unpleasant, but aggressive, the kind of stench that got into your nose and stayed there. The old hay was compressed and damp, heavy with waste, and every shovelful felt like it weighed as much as she did. Her bandaged hands screamed in protest. Within the first 20 minutes, the cloth wrappings were soaked through with a combination of sweat and blood, and things she didn't want to think about. She worked through it, shoveled until the wheelbarrow was full, then pushed it out to the compost pile, which was exactly where Caleb said it would be, downwind and impossible to miss. The wheelbarrow was harder to push than she'd expected. The ground was uneven, and the weight distribution was all wrong. The first time, she nearly tipped it. The second time, she did tip it, spilling half the contents across the path and having to shovel it back in while fighting the urge to cry from pure frustration. By the time she'd finished the first stall, 2 hours had passed. She had 5 more to go. The sun climbed, the temperature rose. Abigail's entire world narrowed down to the rhythm of the work. Shovel, lift, dump, repeat. Push the wheelbarrow, empty it, come back, start again. Her arms shook, her back felt like it might snap. The blisters from yesterday had become open sores, and the ones forming today were already making themselves known. She didn't stop. Somewhere around midday she heard footsteps. She looked up from the third stall, squinting against the light, and saw Caleb approaching. He had something in his hand. Here. He held out a canteen and what looked like bread wrapped in cloth. You haven't eaten. Abigail stared at the offering like it might vanish if she reached for it too quickly. I'm fine. You look like you're about to fall over. Take it. She set down the shovel carefully. Her hands didn't want to let go, the muscles locked from hours of gripping, and accepted the canteen first. The water was cold and tasted like metal and was the best thing she'd ever put in her mouth. She drank too fast, choked, kept drinking anyway. Slow down, Caleb said. You'll make yourself sick. She forced herself to lower the canteen, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand and immediately regretting it when she tasted dirt and worse. The bread was simple, thick cut and probably a day old, but she ate it in 3 bites, barely chewing. Caleb watched her the whole time. When she was finished, he took the canteen back and nodded at her hands. Those need cleaning and new bandages. I'll do it tonight. You'll do it now. Infection out here isn't a joke. You can't work if you can't use your hands. He jerked his head toward the house. Come on. I need to finish the stalls. The stalls will still be here in 20 minutes. Move. She followed him to the house, too tired to argue and honestly too grateful for the break to put up much resistance. The inside was nothing like she'd expected. She'd imagined something bare, maybe dirty, the home of a man who lived alone and didn't care what things looked like. Instead, it was simple but clean. Sparse furniture that looked handmade. A kitchen with dishes drying by the sink, books on a shelf in the corner, actual books, more than she'd ever seen in one place outside the general store. The whole place had the feeling of someone who kept things in order, not because anyone was watching, but because order mattered to them. Sit. Caleb pointed to a chair at the kitchen table. He disappeared into another room and came back with a basin, cloth bandages, and a bottle of something that made Abigail's stomach drop when she saw it. That's gonna hurt, she said quietly. Yeah. He set everything on the table and pulled up a chair across from her. Give me your hands. She hesitated. The idea of letting someone else touch them, of making herself that vulnerable, sent every defensive instinct she had into overdrive. But Caleb just waited, patient in a way she hadn't expected from someone with his reputation, and eventually she extended her hands palm up across the table. He unwrapped the makeshift bandages carefully. The cloth stuck in places where blood had dried, and she couldn't quite swallow the small sound of pain that escaped when he pulled a particularly stubborn piece free. He didn't apologize, just kept working until her hands were bare and the full damage was visible. It was worse than she'd thought. The blisters had merged into larger wounds. Some were still bleeding. The skin around them was red and angry, and when Caleb picked up the bottle and uncorked it, she knew exactly how bad the next part was going to be. This is whiskey, he said. It's all I've got for disinfecting. You want something to bite down on? She shook her head. He poured it over her hands. The pain was immediate and total. White-hot fire that made every nerve ending scream. Abigail bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, her whole body going rigid, but she didn't pull away. Didn't make a sound beyond that first sharp intake of breath. Caleb worked fast. He cleaned both hands thoroughly, then wrapped them in fresh bandages, his movements efficient but not rough. When he was done, he sat back and looked at her. You should take tomorrow off. Let those heal. I need the work. You won't be able to work if you cripple yourself. I'll be fine. He made a sound that might have been frustration or respect or both. You're stubborn. I'll give you that. I can't afford not to be. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite sympathy. He didn't seem like the type for sympathy, but maybe recognition. Like he understood something about her situation that he hadn't before. The gloves in the barn, he said finally. The leather ones hanging by the door. Use them tomorrow. Should have told you that yesterday, but I didn't think... He trailed off, shook his head. Just use them. Okay. And pace yourself. The work's not going anywhere. You burn out in 3 days, that doesn't help either of us. Abigail nodded. The kindness was uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and she didn't know what to do with it. Kindness in her experience usually came with conditions, with expectations that would be explained later when it was too late to refuse them. But Caleb just stood up, collected the basin and the bloodied bandages, and nodded toward the door. Finish what you can today. Don't kill yourself doing it. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you something easier until your hands toughen up. She wanted to ask what that meant. Wanted to ask why he was being decent to her when he had no reason to be. Wanted to ask a lot of things, but the question stuck in her throat, and by the time she found her voice, he'd already left the room. The rest of the day was brutal, but manageable. The bandages helped, and the gloves helped more. She finished 5 of the 6 stalls before her body simply refused to continue. The sun was setting when she finally stopped, leaning against the barn wall, every part of her shaking from exhaustion. Caleb appeared like he had some kind of internal clock that told him when the workday ended. He surveyed what she'd done, nodded once, and paid her. Same amount as yesterday, same brief exchange. But this time when he turned to leave, he spoke without looking back. "You did good today, too." The walk back to town was worse than yesterday. Her legs barely functioned. Her hands throbbed despite the bandages. She'd sweated through her dress again, and there was a stain on the hem she knew would never come out. But she had money in her pocket, had proof she could do this. Margaret was waiting in the common room, so were the others. They looked up when Abigail entered, and this time the silence was different, heavier. "Second day," Margaret said. It wasn't a question, but it sounded like an accusation anyway. "Yes." "What did you do today?" "Mucked out stalls." Sarah made a face. That's disgusting." "It's work." Abigail moved toward the stairs, too tired for this conversation, but Margaret stepped in front of her. "How long do you think this is going to last? A week? 2? He's going to get tired of you, Abigail. Men like that always do. And when he sends you away, you'll be right back where you started. Except this time, you'll smell like horse shit." The other girls laughed. It wasn't the cruel laughter from before, though. It was uncertain. Like they weren't sure if they were supposed to find it funny or if something had changed in a way they didn't quite understand yet. "Maybe," Abigail said quietly. "But until then, I've got work." She moved past Margaret and climbed the stairs. Behind her, she heard whispering, but she didn't care enough to try to make out the words. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Their opinions didn't change anything. The third day, Caleb had her oiling saddles and mending tack. It was detailed work that required attention, but wasn't as physically destroying as the stalls had been. Her hands screamed in protest anyway, the oil getting into the wounds despite the gloves, but it was bearable. More than bearable. The fourth day was fence repair. Caleb worked alongside her for that one, showing her how to reset posts and string wire tight enough to hold but not so tight it would snap. They didn't talk much. He wasn't the talking type, and she'd never been good at small talk. But there was something almost comfortable about the silence between them, like neither of them needed to fill it with noise. The fifth day, she arrived to find 3 men standing in the yard talking to Caleb. She recognized 2 of them. Worked at the mill, she thought, or maybe the lumber yard. The third was older, weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent their whole life doing hard labor. They stopped talking when they saw her. "That's her?" one of them said. He didn't bother lowering his voice. "That's who you hired?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's not your concern, Davies. Just seems strange is all. You've turned away every man who's come looking for work in the past 6 months, but some girl shows up and suddenly you're running a charity?" "I said it's not your concern." The older man spat into the dirt. "Town's talking, Vance, saying you've gone soft. Saying maybe you're not as particular about your reputation as you used to be. The town can say whatever it wants, doesn't change anything. It changes how people see you, how they see her." He looked at Abigail directly now, his expression somewhere between pity and disgust. "Girl like that working out here alone with you, people are going to think things, probably already are." Abigail felt heat crawl up her neck. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. They never did when she needed them most. Caleb took a step forward. It wasn't a big movement, but it changed the entire dynamic. The 3 men shifted their weight, suddenly uncomfortable, suddenly aware that they were on his property having a conversation he didn't want to have. "You came here to talk about work or to gossip like a bunch of old women." Caleb's voice was dangerously quiet. "Because if it's the second one, you can leave right now." Davies held up his hands. "Just saying what people are saying, no offense meant." "Then stop saying it. On my land or off it. We done here." The men left. Not quickly, but not slowly either. That careful pace of people who wanted to maintain dignity, but also wanted to be somewhere else. When they were gone, Caleb turned to Abigail. "Don't listen to them. They're not wrong, though. People are going to talk. People always talk, doesn't make them right." He picked up a coil of rope from the ground. "Come on, fences won't fix themselves." They worked through the morning, resetting posts that had rotted through and replacing sections of wire that had rusted beyond use. The sun was brutal, and Abigail's water ran out faster than she'd anticipated. She didn't mention it, just kept working, ignoring the way her head started to feel light, the way her vision blurred at the edges. She was pulling wire tight when her hand slipped. The wire snapped back, catching her across the forearm and opening a cut from wrist to elbow. Blood appeared immediately, bright red against her pale skin. "Damn it!" Caleb was beside her before she even registered what had happened. He grabbed her arm, examining the cut with the same clinical efficiency he'd shown with her hands. "It's not deep, but it needs cleaning. House. Now." This time she didn't argue. The cut burned and blood was dripping into the dirt in fat drops that made her stomach turn. She let him lead her back to the house, let him sit her down at the kitchen table again, let him clean and bandage the wound while she stared at the wall and tried not to think about how this was the most anyone had touched her in years. "You need to be more careful," he said, tying off the bandage. "Wire's not forgiving. You lose focus for even a second, it'll tear you up." "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize, just pay attention." He sat back, studying her face. "You look pale. When's the last time you ate?" "This morning? That was 6 hours ago. You need to eat more. This kind of work burns through energy faster than you think." I don't have..." She stopped herself, but not fast enough. "Don't have what?" "Food." Abigail looked down at her bandaged arm. "The boarding house provides meals, but you have to pay extra for anything beyond bread and soup. Most of what I'm earning is going toward my room. There's not much left over." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and moved to the cupboard, pulling out bread, cheese, and what looked like dried meat. He put it all on the table in front of her. "Eat." "I can't." "You can and you will. You're working for me, which means I need you functional. Can't be functional if you're half-starved." He poured her water from the pitcher. "And starting tomorrow, you eat lunch here. Not bread from this morning. Actual food. Understood?" She looked up at him, searching for the angle, the catch, the moment where this generosity would turn into something she'd have to pay back in ways she didn't want to think about. But his expression was unreadable, his arms crossed, waiting for an answer. "Understood," she said quietly. "Good. Now eat. We've still got 3 more fence sections to finish before dark." The food helped. More than helped. It made her realize just how much she'd been running on empty. By the time they went back out to the fences, she felt almost human again. The work went faster. The afternoon passed in that same comfortable silence, broken only by occasional instructions or warnings about the wire. When the sun started to set, Caleb paid her and added something extra. "What's this for?" Abigail looked at the additional money. "Hazard pay. For the cut." "That was my fault. Still happened on my property. Take it." She did. What else could she do? The money meant another day where she didn't have to worry. Another night in a bed instead of whatever alternative waited for people who ran out of options in a town this size. The 6th day brought rain. Not the gentle kind, but the aggressive type that turned dirt roads into mud and made every outdoor task miserable. Abigail showed up anyway, soaked through before she even reached the barn, and found Caleb waiting with an expression that might have been approval. "Can't work the fences in this," he said. "But the equipment shed needs organizing. It's covered, dry. Should keep you busy." The shed was almost as bad as the barn had been on that first day. Tools everywhere, some broken, some just misplaced, all of it covered in years of accumulated dust and grime. But it was dry, and the work was methodical, and Abigail lost herself in it the way she'd learned to lose herself in all of it. She was sorting through a box of rusted nails, trying to determine which ones could be salvaged and which were beyond hope, when the shed door opened. She looked up expecting Caleb, but it was a woman, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the kind of face that smiled easily but wasn't smiling now. "You must be Abigail," the woman said. "Yes." "I'm Eleanor Pierce. I run the general store in town." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her against the rain. "I've been hearing stories." Abigail set down the box of nails. "What kind of stories?" "The kind where a girl shows up at Caleb Vance's ranch and somehow doesn't get run off within the first hour. The kind where that same girl keeps coming back day after day, and Caleb keeps letting her." Eleanor's eyes were sharp, assessing. "People are talking, dear, and not kindly. I'm just working." "I'm sure you are. But you need to understand something. This town has opinions about Caleb Vance, and those opinions aren't good. A young woman working for him, alone, out here where no one can see—" She trailed off meaningfully. "Nothing's happening," Abigail said firmly. "He hired me to work, that's all. And I believe you, but belief doesn't stop tongues from wagging. I came out here to warn you. Be careful. For your reputation, if nothing else." "My reputation wasn't exactly pristine before this." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps not. But there's a difference between being invisible and being notorious. Right now you're heading toward the latter. Just think about what that might mean for you when this job ends." She left after that, disappearing back into the rain, leaving Abigail alone with the rusted nails and the growing certainty that nothing in her life was ever going to be simple. Caleb found her 20 minutes later, still standing in the same spot, staring at nothing. "Mrs. Pierce came by," she said before he could ask. "I saw her leaving. What did she want?" "To warn me. About my reputation. About what people are saying." Caleb's jaw worked. "What did you tell her?" "That I'm just working." "And?" "And I don't know if she believed me. I don't know if it matters if she believed me." Abigail looked at him directly. "Is this going to be a problem?" "For me? No. For you?" He shrugged. "Depends on how much you care what people think." "I've never had the luxury of caring about that." "Then nothing's changed." He gestured at the boxes. "Finish up here. I'll see you tomorrow." But something had changed. Abigail could feel it in the way her stomach twisted on the walk back to town, could see it in the way people's eyes followed her when she walked through the street. The whispers had gotten louder, the looks had gotten longer. Margaret's smirk had gotten wider. She'd thought the work would be the hard part, thought if she could just prove she was capable, everything else would fall into place. She'd been wrong. The real test wasn't the work. It was everything that came with it, the judgment, the assumptions. The slow realization that some battles couldn't be won with effort alone because some people had already decided what the story was and no amount of truth would change their minds. That night, lying in her narrow bed with her hands aching and her arm throbbing where the wire had cut her, Abigail made a decision. She could quit, could walk away from Caleb Vance and his ranch and all the talk that came with it, could go back to being invisible, to scraping by on odd jobs, to slowly disappearing until even she forgot she existed. Or she could keep showing up, could keep working, could prove that she was more than what anyone expected her to be, even if the proving came with a cost she hadn't anticipated. She knew which option was smarter, knew which one would cause her less pain in the long run. But when dawn came, she got up anyway, wrapped her hands, put on her work dress that was more patches than original fabric now, and walked to the ranch, because quitting meant giving them what they wanted, and she'd spent her whole life giving people what they wanted. She was done with that. The second week brought visitors Abigail hadn't expected. She was hauling water to the horses when she heard the laughter, high-pitched, deliberate, designed to carry. She knew that sound, had been the target of it more times than she could count. Margaret and Sarah stood by the fence near the road, arms linked, watching her like she was a show they'd paid to see. Two other girls from the boarding house flanked them, their faces already arranged into expressions of barely contained amusement. Abigail's first instinct was to turn away, to pretend she hadn't seen them. But they'd come all this way. Pretending wouldn't make them leave. She set down the water buckets and walked over. Her hands were steadier than they'd been 2 weeks ago. Her shoulders didn't hunch the way they used to. Small changes, maybe, but she felt them. "Abigail," Margaret called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We were just passing by and thought we'd see how you were managing. It's been what, almost 2 weeks now?" 13 days, Abigail said. 13 days of shoveling horse shit and fixing fences. Sarah shook her head, her smile sharp. "I have to admit, I didn't think you'd last 3. Color me impressed." "We brought you something." One of the other girls, Catherine, Abigail thought her name was, held up a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "A care package, some bread, a bit of cheese. Thought you might need it, working out here in the middle of nowhere with no one around, but him," Margaret finished, her eyes gleaming. "How is Mr. Vance, by the way? Still as charming as ever?" Abigail took the bundle. It was heavier than it should be for bread and cheese. She unwrapped it slowly and found a rock nested among the food. Not even hidden, just there. Obvious, part of the joke. The girls erupted into laughter. "Oh, the look on your face," Sarah gasped between giggles. "We couldn't resist." Abigail stared at the rock. It was smooth, river-worn, about the size of her fist. She could feel the anger building in her chest, hot and tight and familiar. But underneath it was something else. Something that felt almost like pity. They'd walked all the way out here for this, had planned it, coordinated their schedules, brought props. All of it just to see her reaction, to remind her that she was still the joke, still the girl who didn't matter enough to deserve basic decency. "You should leave," Abigail said quietly. Margaret's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Leave. This is private property, and you weren't invited. We're on a public road. You're on the edge of it. One more step and you're trespassing." Abigail met Margaret's eyes directly. "And I don't think Mr. Vance would appreciate that." "Oh, now it's Mr. Vance, is it?" Margaret's voice took on a mocking tone. "How proper, how professional. Tell me, Abigail, does he call you Miss Carter when you're alone together? Or does he skip the formalities entirely?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. The other girls shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that they'd crossed a line even they hadn't quite meant to reach. "You don't know what you're talking about," Abigail said. "Don't I? A girl like you, working for a man like him, all alone out here day after day." Margaret took a deliberate step forward, her foot crossing onto ranch property. "People talk, Abigail. They're saying things, nasty things, about what you might be doing to keep this job, about what he might be getting in return for his generosity." "Then people are wrong." "Are they?" Margaret's smile was cruel now, all pretense of playfulness gone. "Because from where I'm standing, there's no other explanation. You're not strong enough for this work. You're not skilled enough. So what else could you possibly be offering that he can't get from an actual ranch hand?" The words hit like physical blows. Abigail's hands clenched into fists, and she felt the scabs on her palms crack and start to bleed. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my land." They all turned. Caleb was walking toward them from the barn, his stride purposeful, his expression carved from stone. He wasn't yelling, wasn't running, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands hung loose at his sides, that made every one of the girls take an involuntary step back. "We were just," Sarah started. "I don't care what you were doing. I care that you're doing it here." Caleb stopped a few feet from the fence, his eyes moving across each of their faces with cold precision. "You came here to mock her, to make her feel small, to remind her that you think she's beneath you." "That's not," Margaret tried. "Don't!" The single word cut her off. "I was watching from the barn, saw the whole thing, the rock and the food, the accusations, all of it. So let's not pretend this was some friendly visit." Catherine looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. Sarah's face had gone pale, but Margaret held her ground, chin lifted in defiance even though her hands were shaking. "People have a right to their opinions," Margaret said. "They do, but they don't have a right to bring those opinions onto private property and use them to harass my employee." Caleb's voice was quiet, controlled, which somehow made it more frightening. "Miss Carter is here because she works harder than anyone I've hired in 5 years. She shows up before dawn, doesn't complain, doesn't quit when the work gets hard. She's earned her place here." You can't actually believe. What I believe isn't your concern. What should be your concern is that you're still standing on my land after I told you to leave. So I'll say it one more time. Get off my property. They left. Quickly this time, their earlier bravado evaporating under Caleb's stare. They didn't look back, didn't say anything else, just hurried down the road until they were small figures in the distance. Abigail stood frozen, the bundle of food and rocks still in her hands. She couldn't look at Caleb, couldn't face him after what Margaret had said, after what he'd overheard. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I didn't invite them here. I know you didn't." His voice had lost its edge, but not its firmness. "And you've got nothing to apologize for." They said things about us, about what they think is happening. I heard what they said. People in town are going to believe it. Probably already do. Let them believe whatever they want. Caleb took the bundle from her hands and unwrapped it, removing the rock and tossing it into the field. He rewrapped the bread and cheese and handed it back. "This is yours. Actually yours. Don't let them ruin it." Abigail looked down at the food. Her throat felt tight. "Why are you defending me?" "Because you deserve defending, and because I'm tired of watching people treat you like you're nothing." He turned back toward the barn. "Take your lunch break. You've earned it." She watched him walk away, her mind spinning. Caleb Vance, the man the whole town feared, had just gone to bat for her, had stood between her and the people who'd spent years making her life miserable, had done it without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. She didn't know what to do with that, didn't know how to process kindness that didn't come with strings attached. But standing there in the morning sun with bread and cheese in her hands and the echo of Margaret's laughter fading into memory, something shifted inside her, something small but fundamental. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her side. The trouble really started 3 days later. Abigail was in the equipment shed, organizing tools that had probably been untouched since Caleb's father was alive, when she heard voices. Multiple voices, all male, all angry. She moved to the door and looked out. 5 men stood in the yard talking to Caleb. She recognized most of them: Davies from the mill, 2 ranch hands who worked for the property to the east, the blacksmith, and someone she didn't know but who carried himself like he thought he was important. "This is ridiculous, Vance," the unknown man was saying. "You've been turning away able-bodied workers for months, but some girl shows up and suddenly you're running a charity?" "I've explained this already," Caleb said, his tone flat. "She does the work. She gets paid, same as anyone else." "But she's not the same as anyone else, is she?" Davies stepped forward, his arms crossed. "She's a woman, living in town, working out here alone with you. People are talking. People are always talking. I don't care." Well, maybe you should care, because what you're doing here, it's not right. It's not proper, and it's making people uncomfortable. "Then they should stay off my property." Caleb's voice had taken on that dangerous, quiet quality. "What I do on my own land with my own money is none of their concern." The blacksmith spat into the dirt. "Everything's everyone's concern when it affects the town's reputation. You want people to think we're the kind of place where a man can keep a young woman out here for—" "Careful," Caleb interrupted. "Real careful how you finish that sentence. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. It don't look right. Her coming out here every day, you feeding her, giving her money. What's she doing to earn it that an actual worker couldn't do better?" Abigail felt ice run down her spine. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The accusation was right there in the open, ugly and direct. "She's working," Caleb said. "Same as I told Davies. Same as I'm telling you now. If you've got a problem with that, take it up somewhere else." "We're taking it up here because this is where the problem is." The important-looking man stepped forward. "My name's William Hartford. I'm on the town council. We've had complaints, concerns about the nature of your relationship with this girl." "There is no relationship. She's an employee." "Then prove it. Let us talk to her. Let us see what she has to say about the work she's doing here." Caleb's jaw tightened. "No." "Why not? If everything's above board like you claim." "Because she doesn't owe you an explanation, doesn't owe any of you anything. You want to question someone? Question me. But you leave her out of it." "Can't do that, I'm afraid." Hartford's smile was thin and sharp. The girl's reputation is at stake here. People are saying things. If she's innocent of wrongdoing, she should want to clear her name. And if she doesn't want to talk to you? Then that tells us something too, doesn't it? Abigail had heard enough. She stepped out of the shed, her legs steadier than her heart, and walked toward the group. Every eye turned to her. She felt the weight of their judgment, their assumptions, their certainty that they already knew what she was. "I'll talk to you," she said. Caleb turned sharply. "You don't have to." "I know, but I will." She looked at Hartford directly. "What do you want to know?" Hartford's expression shifted, clearly not expecting her cooperation. "Well, that's reasonable. Thank you, Miss Carter. Abigail Carter." "Miss Carter, I'm sure you understand our concern. A young woman of your circumstances, working in such close proximity to a man of Mr. Vance's reputation. People worry." "About what?" "About propriety, about the nature of your work here, about what might be happening that isn't immediately visible to the public eye." Abigail felt anger burning in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "I clean, I organize, I mend equipment, muck out stalls, repair fences, haul water. That's what happens here. Work. And Mr. Vance pays you for this work?" "Yes." "How much?" "That's between me and him." Hartford's eyes narrowed. "It's a simple question, Miss Carter. And it's a private answer. My wages are my business. Unless those wages are payment for services that aren't appropriate for a young woman to be providing." The implication landed like a slap. Abigail heard Caleb make a sound low in his throat, saw him take a step forward, but she held up a hand. This was her fight now. She'd chosen to engage, and she needed to see it through. "I provide labor," she said clearly. "Physical labor. The kind that leaves blisters and scars and makes me so tired I can barely walk back to town at night. If you think there's something else happening here, you're wrong. And if you're spreading that belief around town, you're not just wrong. You're cruel. Cruel is a strong word." "So is what you're implying." Abigail's voice shook, but not from fear, from rage. "You came here with your mind already made up. You've decided I'm something I'm not because it's easier than admitting that maybe, just maybe, a woman can do hard work and be paid fairly for it without there being some hidden shame attached." Davies stepped forward. "Watch your tone, girl. You're talking to a council member. And he's talking to someone who's done nothing wrong. Which one of us should be more concerned about our tone?" The silence that followed was heavy. The men looked at each other, clearly not prepared for resistance. Hartford's face had gone red, his composure cracking. "Your attitude isn't helping your case," he said stiffly. "I don't have a case. I have a job. You're the ones trying to make it into something else. We're trying to protect you." "I don't need your protection. I need you to leave me alone, to let me work in peace, to stop treating me like I'm either a victim or a criminal when I'm neither." Caleb moved to stand beside her, not in front of her, not protecting her, but next to her, united. "You've heard what she has to say. Now get off my property." Hartford straightened his jacket. "This isn't over, Vance. The council will be discussing this matter further. There are laws about what? Hiring who I want on my own land? Last I checked, that's my right. About maintaining decency standards in the community. Then go maintain them somewhere else. We're done here." The men left, but not quietly. They muttered among themselves, shot dark looks over their shoulders, made it clear that this confrontation was just the beginning. When they were gone, Abigail felt her knees go weak. She stumbled slightly, and Caleb caught her elbow. "You okay?" he asked. "No." She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "They're going to make this impossible. You know that, right? They're not going to stop until I'm gone, or until you fire me, or until something breaks. Let them try. You don't understand. Those men, they have power. Hartford's on the town council. Davies employs half the people in town. They can make life very difficult for both of us. I've survived difficult before. But have you survived being the target of an entire town's gossip?" Abigail turned to face him. "Because that's what's coming. They're going to say things, horrible things, about you, about me, about what they think is happening here. And once those stories start, they don't stop. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want to quit?" "No." "Then why are we having this conversation?" "Because I need you to understand what you're getting into by keeping me around. What it's going to cost you." "I already know what it costs. Been counting that price since day one." He met her eyes. "But what you need to understand is that I'm not interested in doing what's easy. Never have been. Those men think they can intimidate me into firing you because that's what would make their lives simpler. Well, too bad. I don't make decisions based on what's simple for everyone else." "Why not?" "Because if I did, I'd be just like them. And I'd rather be alone on this ranch for the rest of my life than become that." Abigail wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways this was going to get worse before it got better, if it got better at all. But the look in Caleb's eyes stopped her. He wasn't being noble, wasn't playing hero. He was just being stubborn in the same way she'd been stubborn every morning she showed up for work. Sometimes stubbornness was all you had. That night, walking back to town, Abigail noticed the stares. They weren't subtle anymore. People stopped their conversations when she passed, turned to watch her go by, whispered just loud enough that she could hear the tone, even if she couldn't make out the words. The boarding house was worse. Mrs. Brennan met her at the door, her face set in hard lines. "We need to talk, Miss Carter." Abigail followed her to the small office off the kitchen. Mrs. Brennan sat behind her desk, hands folded, every inch the disappointed authority figure. "I've had visitors today," she began, "members of the town council. They had some concerns about your current employment situation. Let me guess. They think I'm doing something inappropriate. They think you're putting yourself in a compromising position, and by extension, you're reflecting poorly on this establishment. I'm working, that's all." "That may be all in truth, but truth and perception are not always the same thing." Mrs. Brennan leaned forward. "This boarding house survives on its reputation. We house respectable young women. If people begin to think that we're harboring someone who's involved in improper behavior, it affects all the girls here. So you want me to leave? I want you to make a choice. Either you quit working for Mr. Vance and find employment elsewhere, or you find somewhere else to live. I can't have both, you working there and staying here. It's too much of a liability." Abigail felt the floor drop out from under her. "You're giving me an ultimatum." "I'm giving you options, which is more than some would do. When do I have to decide?" "End of the week. That gives you 4 days to figure out what matters more to you, this job or this roof over your head." Abigail walked upstairs in a daze. The other girls avoided her eyes. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked vindicated. Margaret looked triumphant. She sat on her bed and counted the money she'd saved. 2 weeks of wages minus what she'd paid for room and board. It wasn't enough. Wasn't even close to enough to find her own place, to survive independently. She'd need months of steady work to build up that kind of security. But if she quit the ranch, she'd be back to nothing. Back to odd jobs that barely paid. Back to being invisible. Back to a life where the only certainty was that tomorrow would be just as hopeless as today. The choice should have been simple. Should have been obvious. A roof over her head was more important than pride. Survival trumped stubbornness. But when she thought about walking away from the ranch, about giving up the one place where she'd proven something to herself, her chest went tight and her hands started shaking. She'd already lost so much. Given up so much. Shrunk herself down to nothing for so many years just to survive. She didn't want to shrink anymore. The next morning, she showed up at the ranch like always. Caleb was working on the porch, replacing boards that had rotted through. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. "You're late," he said. "It's almost full light. I need to tell you something." Abigail stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Mrs. Brennan gave me an ultimatum. I either quit working here or I have to leave the boarding house by the end of the week." Caleb set down his hammer. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing yet. I have 4 days to decide." "And what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I don't have anywhere else to live. I'm thinking quitting makes sense. I'm thinking—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "But you showed up anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Abigail looked at him, really looked at him, at this man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd defended her to her face and behind her back, who'd paid her fairly and treated her like she mattered. Because I'm tired of letting other people make my decisions for me, she said quietly. I'm tired of being afraid. And I'm tired of being the person everyone expects me to be. Caleb stood up, walked down the steps until he was level with her. If you stay, it's going to get worse. You know that. I know. The town's going to come after you harder. They'll make up stories, might even try to force me to fire you through official channels. I know that too. And you still want to keep working here? I don't know if I want to, but I need to. Not just for the money, for me. Because if I quit now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to stay. Caleb studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, then here's what we're going to do. There's a room in the main house, small, hasn't been used in years. You can stay there. Abigail's eyes widened. I can't. You need a place to live. I've got space. Seems simple enough. That'll make everything worse. People already think, I don't care what people think. Never have. But I understand if you do. He crossed his arms. Here's the alternative. You quit, you move out of the boarding house, and then what? Where do you go? What do you do? She didn't have an answer for that. Right. So either you stay here, work here, and deal with people talking, or you leave, and you're homeless and jobless. And people talk anyway. At least this way, you're not starving while they run their mouths. It's not appropriate. Appropriate would be those people leaving you alone to do your job. But they're not interested in appropriate. They're interested in control. He turned back toward the house. Room's on the second floor, east side. Hasn't been cleaned in a while, but it's got a bed and a door that locks. You want it, it's yours. You don't, that's fine too. But make a decision soon because we've got fence posts that need setting before the ground gets too hard. He picked up his hammer and went back to work, leaving Abigail standing in the yard with a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She could keep shrinking, keep letting fear dictate her life, keep being the person everyone expected her to be. Or she could take the room, take the risk, take a chance on the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something better than the corner she'd been hiding in her whole life. She looked at the house, at the window on the second floor that would be hers if she wanted it, at Caleb on the porch, working steadily, not looking at her, not pressuring her, just waiting for her to decide. I'll take it, she said. He didn't stop working, didn't even look up, just said, good. Now get to those fence posts before I change my mind about paying you for standing around. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Abigail almost smiled. Moving her belongings from the boarding house took less than an hour. Abigail owned so little that everything fit into a single worn canvas bag. 2 dresses, undergarments, a brush with half its bristles missing, and a small tin box containing the money she'd saved. That was it. 22 years of life condensed into something she could carry with one hand. Mrs. Brennan watched from the doorway as Abigail descended the stairs for the last time. The woman's expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in her eyes that might have been regret, or maybe just relief that a problem was removing itself. You're making a mistake, Mrs. Brennan said. Maybe. Abigail shifted the bag to her other shoulder. But it's my mistake to make. People will say terrible things about you. They already do. This will be worse. You understand that, don't you? Living under the same roof as him, unmarried, unchaperoned. There's no coming back from this kind of reputation damage. Abigail paused at the door. My reputation was already damaged. I was the girl no one wanted, the one you all tolerated because I worked hard and stayed quiet. Moving to the ranch doesn't change what I am in people's eyes. It just makes their judgments more convenient. You could find other work, other lodging. Where? Who in this town is going to hire me now? Who's going to rent me a room after the council's made it clear what they think I am? She looked at Mrs. Brennan directly. You know there's nowhere else. That's why you gave me the ultimatum. You knew I'd have to choose between homelessness and this. Mrs. Brennan's mouth tightened. I won't take you back. When this arrangement falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me for your old room. I won't. Abigail walked out into the afternoon sun. Behind her, she heard the door close with a finality that should have felt frightening. Instead, it felt like shedding weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The walk to the ranch was different this time. She wasn't going to work. She was going home. The word felt strange even thinking it. Home. She'd never really had one of those, just places she was allowed to exist temporarily until she wasn't useful anymore. Caleb was waiting on the porch when she arrived. He took her bag without asking and led her inside, up the stairs to the second floor. The room was exactly as he'd described, small, dusty, with a narrow bed pushed against one wall and a dresser that had seen better decades. A single window looked out over the eastern pasture. The glass was clouded with grime, but light came through in soft filtered rays. "I cleared out the worst of the dust," Caleb said, setting her bag on the bed. "Sheets are clean. Dresser drawers stick, but they open if you pull hard enough. There's a wash basin on the stand and the privy's out back, same one I use." Abigail looked around the space. It was sparse, worn, nothing special, but it was hers. A door that locked, a window. A bed that didn't have to be shared with two other girls who resented her presence. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We need to establish some rules." Here it comes, she thought, the conditions, the expectations, the price for this generosity. "I'm listening," she said, her shoulders tensing. "You've got full access to the house, kitchen, sitting room, all of it. But my room's at the end of the hall, and that door stays closed. You don't go in there, I don't go in yours, understood?" She nodded. "Meals we'll figure out as we go. I'm not much of a cook, but I manage. You want to help with that? Fine. You don't? Also fine. I'm not expecting you to play housekeeper just because you're living here." "What are you expecting?" He met her eyes. "Same thing I've always expected. You do your work, I pay you fair. This room doesn't change that arrangement. You're not paying rent with labor. You're not—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I'm not that kind of man, and I need you to believe that." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "I believe you." "Good, because people are going to assume the worst. Town's going to go crazy when they find out you're living here, and I need to know you can handle that. Not just the talk, but the isolation, because once you move in here, you're cutting yourself off from whatever social connections you had left. I didn't have any to begin with. You had the boarding house, other girls your age, the possibility of making friends, finding a husband eventually, having a normal life. None of that was ever going to happen for me anyway." Abigail sat down on the bed, testing the mattress. It was firmer than she was used to. "I'm not giving up anything I actually had, just the illusion that I might have it someday." Caleb leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "You're too young to be that cynical. I'm exactly the right age for it. I just stopped pretending otherwise." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll let you get settled. Work starts same time tomorrow. But today, take the time to make this space yours." He left, closing the door behind him. Abigail sat in the silence, her hands folded in her lap, and tried to process what had just happened. She'd made a choice that would define the rest of her life. Had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Everything from this moment forward would be measured against this decision. She should have been terrified. Should have been second-guessing herself, already wondering if she'd made a horrible mistake. But sitting there in that small room with dust motes floating in the afternoon light, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt free. The town's reaction came faster than expected. By the next afternoon, while Abigail was repairing a section of barn wall that had started to bow, a carriage appeared on the road. Not just any carriage, the kind that spoke of money and status, and people who thought their opinions mattered more than most. It stopped at the gate, and a woman emerged. She was perhaps 50, dressed in a dark blue traveling suit that probably cost more than Abigail had earned in her entire life. Her face was severe, her posture rigid, and she moved with the kind of purpose that suggested she was used to being obeyed. Caleb appeared from the house, intercepting her before she could get far into the yard. Abigail stayed where she was, hammer in hand, but she could hear every word. "Mr. Vance?" the woman said. "I'm Constance Hartford, William's wife." "I know who you are, Mrs. Hartford." "Then you know why I'm here. My husband came to speak with you several days ago regarding your employee, the young woman." "Miss Carter, she has a name." "I'm aware. I'm also aware that as of yesterday she's no longer residing at the boarding house, that she's now living here, on your property, in your home." Caleb's expression didn't change. That's correct? And you see nothing wrong with that arrangement? I see a young woman who needed a place to stay in a house with empty rooms. Seemed practical. Mrs. Hartford's eyes narrowed. Practical. That's an interesting word choice. Mr. Vance, I don't know what kind of household you think you're running here, but this town has standards. We have expectations of moral conduct, particularly where young unmarried women are concerned. Miss Carter's moral conduct isn't your business. It is when it affects the community, when it sets a precedent that other young women might follow, when it suggests that this kind of arrangement is acceptable. What kind of arrangement are you referring to exactly? Caleb's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Be specific. Mrs. Hartford's cheeks flushed. A man and a woman, unmarried, living under the same roof without proper supervision or chaperone. It's inappropriate at best. At worst, it's careful how you finish that sentence. I'm trying to help you understand the position you're putting yourself in, the position you're putting her in. This girl has no family, no protection, no one to look out for her interests. Whether you intend it or not, you're taking advantage of her desperation. Abigail set down her hammer and walked over. Both Caleb and Mrs. Hartford turned to look at her. The older woman's expression shifted from righteous indignation to something that might have been pity. Miss Carter, Mrs. Hartford said, I'm glad you're here. Perhaps you can help me make Mr. Vance understand the gravity of this situation. What situation is that? Abigail asked. Your living arrangement. Surely you must see how this looks, how it compromises both your reputation and his. I have a room, a job, food, safety. That's all this is. That may be all it is to you, but the world will see something different. They'll make assumptions. They'll say things that will follow you for the rest of your life. They were already saying those things, Abigail said, before I moved here, before I even started working here. The moment I showed up at this ranch, people decided what I must be. Moving into that room upstairs didn't change their minds. It just confirmed what they already believed. Mrs. Hartford's expression softened slightly. Then why make it worse? Why give them more ammunition? Because I was tired of making myself smaller to fit into their expectations. Tired of apologizing for existing. Tired of letting other people's judgments dictate every choice I make. Abigail's voice was steady, clear. You came here to save me from making a mistake. But you're too late. I already made it, and I'm not sorry. You will be. When this arrangement falls apart, when Mr. Vance tires of you or finds someone else, you'll be left with nothing but shame and a reputation that will prevent you from ever finding decent work or a decent husband. I've never had prospects for either of those things. At least now I have a roof that doesn't leak and work that pays. Mrs. Hartford looked between them, her frustration evident. I came here prepared to offer you an alternative, Miss Carter. A position in my household as a kitchen maid, room and board included, proper references, a respectable situation. But I can see now that you're too foolish to recognize an opportunity when it's presented to you. I'm not foolish. I'm just making different choices than you would make. Choices have consequences. So does judgment. So does cruelty. So does standing by while people are treated as less than human because they don't fit into your idea of what's proper. Abigail stepped forward. You want to help me? Then go back to town and tell people to leave me alone. Tell them I'm working an honest job for honest pay. Tell them that what happens on this ranch is none of their concern. I can't tell them that because it wouldn't be true. What happens here affects all of us. The moral fabric of this community is already torn, Caleb interrupted. Has been for years. You just didn't notice because it wasn't your problem. But now that someone's actually trying to survive outside the neat little boxes you've built, suddenly it's a crisis. Mrs. Hartford drew herself up to her full height. My husband will hear about this. The council will hear about this. There are laws, Mr. Vance, ordinances about maintaining public decency. Then let them enforce those laws. Let the council come. Let the whole town come if they want. But until someone shows me a legal document that says I can't hire who I want or house who I want on my own property, we're done here. He turned and walked back toward the barn, dismissing her without another word. Mrs. Hartford stood frozen for a moment, clearly unaccustomed to being spoken to with such finality. Then she looked at Abigail one last time. You're throwing your life away, she said quietly. And for what? Pride? For a chance, Abigail replied. That's more than I had before. Mrs. Hartford returned to her carriage and left. Abigail watched the dust settle on the road, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. She'd just burned another bridge, had made another enemy, had pushed herself further into isolation with every word, but she'd also stood up for herself, had spoken her truth without apology, had refused to let someone else define what her life should be. That had to count for something. That evening, after the work was done and the sun had set, Abigail found herself in the kitchen helping Caleb prepare dinner. It wasn't much. Bread, stew made from vegetables, and some kind of meat she didn't ask about. But it was warm and filling and tasted better than anything she'd eaten at the boarding house. They ate in silence for a while. Then Caleb said, "You handled Mrs. Hartford well. I probably made things worse. You told the truth. That's never wrong. It's not about right or wrong. It's about consequences. She's going to go back to town and tell everyone I'm defiant, ungrateful, exactly the kind of girl they think I am. Does it matter what they think?" Abigail set down her spoon. "It should matter. Society runs on reputation, on what people believe about you. Without that, you're nothing." That's one way to look at it. Another way is that society's full of people who judge based on appearance rather than truth, and their opinions are worth exactly as much as the effort they put into understanding before they formed them, which is to say, nothing. You really don't care what anyone thinks, do you? I care about some things, some people, but I stopped caring about the collective opinion a long time ago. He took a drink from his cup. My father used to say that the only person you answer to at the end of the day is yourself. Everyone else is just noise. What was he like? Your father? Caleb's expression shifted, something guarded sliding into place. Complicated. He built this ranch from nothing, worked himself into an early grave doing it. He had standards, high ones, didn't tolerate weakness or excuses. Sounds difficult. It was. But it taught me something important, that approval from others doesn't matter if you can't respect yourself. He didn't care if the town liked him, didn't care if he had friends. He cared about the land, the work, doing things right. Caleb paused. Sometimes I think he cared too much about that and not enough about anything else. But I understood it. Still do. Is that why you work alone? Because he did? I work alone because most people aren't worth the trouble they bring. They quit when things get hard. They complain. They expect praise for doing the bare minimum. It's easier to just handle it myself. But you hired me. I did. Why? I'm not strong. I'm not skilled. I'm exactly the kind of person you just described as not worth the trouble. Caleb looked at her across the table, his eyes unreadable in the lamplight. You're nothing like those people. You don't quit. You don't complain. You don't expect anything beyond what you've earned. And you showed up on my land as a joke, as someone else's entertainment, and you turned it into something real. He stood, collecting the dishes. That's worth more than strength or skill. That's character. Abigail felt something tight loosen in her chest. She'd spent so long believing she had to be more, stronger, smarter, better, to deserve anything good. The idea that just being herself, flawed and stubborn and desperate, was enough. She didn't know what to do with that. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing that, when no one else did." Caleb didn't respond, just carried the dishes to the basin and started washing them. Abigail joined him, drying each plate and cup as he finished, and they worked together in the kind of companionable silence that felt almost like peace. The crisis came on a Tuesday. Abigail had been living at the ranch for 5 days when Mrs. Brennan arrived in a hired carriage, accompanied by William Hartford and a man Abigail didn't recognize. They came in the morning, before the heat set in, and they brought official-looking papers. Caleb met them at the gate, his expression already hardening. "This is private property." "We're aware," Hartford said, "but we have a legal matter to discuss that requires Miss Carter's presence." Abigail emerged from the barn where she'd been organizing equipment. The stranger's eyes swept over her, taking in her work clothes, her dirty hands, her hair pulled back in a practical braid, and his mouth tightened in disapproval. "Miss Carter," Hartford said, "this is Judge Morrison. He's here in an official capacity." The judge stepped forward. He was older than Hartford, his face weathered and serious. Miss Carter, I've received a petition from Mrs. Brennan regarding your current living situation. She's expressed concern that you may be in a vulnerable position here and has requested that the court intervene for your protection. Abigail's blood went cold. Protection from what? From potential exploitation, from an arrangement that may not be in your best interests. The judge glanced at Caleb. It's the court's responsibility to ensure that young women without family or proper guardianship aren't taken advantage of. I'm not being taken advantage of, Abigail said firmly. I'm working, being paid, living in a room that was offered to me freely. There's nothing that requires court intervention. Mrs. Brennan spoke up, her voice carrying false concern. Dear, I understand that you may feel obligated to say that, but you need to understand that we're trying to help you. This situation, living here, unchaperoned with a man of questionable temperament, it's not appropriate. It's not safe. Mr. Vance has never been anything but professional with me. That may be true now, the judge said, but the potential for harm exists, and given Mr. Vance's reputation for violence, his isolation from the community, and the power imbalance inherent in your arrangement, the court has grounds to remove you from this situation for your own protection. Remove me? Abigail's voice rose. Remove me to where? Mrs. Brennan has agreed to take you back at the boarding house, under supervision this time, with strict conditions about your employment, which means I can't work here anymore. That's correct. Abigail looked at Mrs. Brennan, seeing the truth written clearly on the older woman's face. This wasn't about protection. This was about control, about punishment, about making sure she learned her lesson for daring to step outside the boundaries they'd set for her. No, Abigail said. The judge frowned. I'm sorry? No, I'm not going back. I'm not leaving. You can't force me. Miss Carter, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Reasonable would be respecting my choices. Reasonable would be believing me when I tell you I'm fine. This isn't about my safety. This is about a bunch of people who don't like that I'm not following their rules. Hartford stepped forward. Young lady, you need to watch your tone. Judge Morrison is trying to help you. I don't need his help. I need to be left alone to live my life. You're not in a position to make that decision, the judge said, his patience clearly wearing thin. You're unmarried, without family, and living in a situation that violates community standards of decency. The court has the authority. What authority? Caleb interrupted, his voice cutting through the conversation like a blade. Show me the specific law that says you can forcibly remove an adult woman from a private residence where she's living of her own free will. The decency statutes are vague guidelines about public conduct, not legal grounds for removing someone from their home. And last I checked, this ranch isn't public property. The judge's expression hardened. Are you claiming Miss Carter as your ward because without that legal relationship you have no say in this matter? I'm claiming she's an adult who can make her own decisions. And unless she's been declared incompetent, which she hasn't, you don't have the right to force her to go anywhere. Mr. Vance, I understand you may have developed feelings that cloud your judgment here, but this woman is clearly in a vulnerable position. Stop talking about me like I'm not here, Abigail said, her voice sharp enough to silence them all. She turned to the judge. You want to know if I'm vulnerable? Fine. I'm vulnerable. I've been vulnerable my entire life. Vulnerable to people who think they know what's best for me. Vulnerable to women like Mrs. Brennan, who profit off girls like me and then throw us out when we're inconvenient. Vulnerable to men like Mr. Hartford, who hide their cruelty behind concern. Miss Carter, Mrs. Brennan started. I'm not finished. You all came here with papers and official titles and the belief that you have the right to decide my future. But none of you asked me what I want. None of you cared that I'm happy here, that I'm working, that for the first time in my life, I have something that feels like it might be mine. Her hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. So here's what I'm telling you, Judge Morrison. I'm not leaving. You can threaten me. You can try to use the law to force me. But I'm an adult. I'm not breaking any laws, and I'm choosing to stay here. If you don't like that, I don't care. The silence that followed was absolute. The judge looked at her with an expression that might have been respect or might have been anger. It was hard to tell. Hartford's face had gone red. Mrs. Brennan looked like she'd been slapped. Finally, the judge spoke. Very well, but understand this. If any complaint comes forward about mistreatment, about inappropriate conduct, about anything that suggests you're being harmed or exploited, the court will step in. And next time, Miss Carter, your cooperation won't be optional. There won't be a next time, Caleb said coldly, because there won't be any complaints. Now get off my property. They left, but not without Mrs. Brennan shooting one final look at Abigail, a look that promised this wasn't over. When they were gone, when the dust from their carriage had settled, Abigail felt her legs give out. She sat down hard on the ground, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and fear, and something that felt almost like triumph. Caleb crouched beside her. You okay? I just told a judge and the town council to leave me alone. I'm either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and I'm not sure which. Maybe both. Doesn't matter, though. You stood up for yourself. That takes courage. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. He offered her his hand. Come on. We've got work to do. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. And as they walked back toward the barn together, Abigail realized something fundamental had changed. She'd drawn her line in the sand, had made her stand, had chosen her path knowing full well what it would cost her. There was no going back now. For better or worse, her fate was tied to this ranch, and the man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. She just hoped that when everything inevitably fell apart, she'd be strong enough to survive it. The week after the judge's visit, the ranch became an island. No one came by with work offers. No one stopped to talk. The few people who passed on the road kept their eyes forward, pretending the property didn't exist. It was isolation by design, the town's way of showing Abigail and Caleb exactly what defiance cost. Abigail felt it most acutely when she needed supplies. The general store had always been neutral territory, a place where even the unwanted could spend their money without judgment. But when she walked in that Saturday morning, the conversation stopped. Mrs. Pierce looked up from behind the counter, her expression carefully blank. Miss Carter, Mrs. Pierce, I need flour, salt, and thread if you have it. The older woman didn't move to gather the items, just stood there, weighing something Abigail couldn't see. Finally, she said, I'm afraid I can't help you today. I have money. It's not about money, it's about, well, it's complicated. No, it's not. You either sell me what I need, or you don't. Mrs. Pierce's jaw tightened. Several of my regular customers have expressed concern about who I do business with. They feel that certain arrangements in this town reflect poorly on all of us, and they've made it clear that if I continue to serve people who are engaged in those arrangements, they'll take their business elsewhere. Abigail felt something cold settle in her stomach. So, you're refusing to sell to me because of where I live. I'm protecting my livelihood. I'm sorry, but I have to think of my own survival here. I understand. Abigail turned to leave, but Mrs. Pierce's voice stopped her. For what it's worth, I don't agree with them. I think what you're doing, trying to make your own way, it takes courage. But courage doesn't pay my bills. And right now this town is watching everyone who interacts with you, looking for signs of support. I can't afford to be seen as supportive. Then you're not sorry at all. You're just scared. There's a difference. Abigail walked out into the bright morning, her hands empty, her chest tight with anger and something that felt dangerously close to despair. She'd known the town would make things difficult, had expected judgment and whispers. But this was different. This was organized, coordinated. The town wasn't just disapproving, it was actively trying to starve her out. She walked back to the ranch, her mind working through the problem. They had some supplies, enough to last maybe 2 weeks if they were careful. But after that, they'd need to buy from somewhere. And if the general store was closed to her, other businesses probably were too. Caleb was in the barn when she returned, working on a saddle that had seen better years. He looked up when she entered, took in her empty hands and tight expression, and set down his tools. They wouldn't sell to you. No. She sat down on a hay bale, suddenly exhausted. Mrs. Pierce said her customers threatened to boycott if she kept doing business with me. With us. Pierce is a coward, always has been. She's practical, and she's right. She can't afford to lose business over this. So what? We're supposed to just accept that we can't buy supplies in our own town? I don't know what we're supposed to do. I didn't think this through. Didn't realize they'd go this far. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then stood. There's another town, Willow Creek, about 15 miles east. We can get what we need there. That's half a day's ride. Then we ride half a day. It's not ideal, but it's better than letting them win. Is that what this is? Winning and losing? That's what they've made it. He picked up the saddle, examining a tear in the leather. They want you gone, Abigail. Want you back in their neat little system where you know your place and don't cause problems. And they're willing to make life hard enough that leaving seems easier than staying. Maybe it is easier. He looked at her sharply. You thinking about leaving? I'm thinking about reality, about how long we can actually sustain this. You need supplies. You need to be able to do business in town. And as long as I'm here, that's not going to happen. I've been doing business just fine. Have you? Or have you been getting by on what you already had, what you'd already built before I showed up and complicated everything? Caleb set down the saddle and crossed his arms. You want the truth? Yeah, this complicates things, makes simple transactions harder. But I chose that complication, knew what I was getting into when I offered you work. Knew it even better when I offered you a room. So don't stand there and tell me I'm some kind of victim in this. I made my choices with my eyes open. But why? Why risk all of this for someone like me? Someone like you, he repeated, his voice hard. You mean someone who works twice as hard as anyone I've ever hired? Someone who doesn't quit when things get difficult? Someone who stood up to a judge and the town council because she refused to let them make her decisions for her? He took a step toward her. That's who you are, Abigail. And if you think I'm going to let a bunch of small-minded hypocrites chase you off because they don't like what we represent, you don't know me at all. What do we represent? People who don't fit, who refuse to be what everyone expects them to be, who'd rather stand alone than compromise who they are for acceptance. He paused. My father taught me that approval is cheap, respect is what matters, and you've earned mine. That's worth more than being able to buy flour at Pierce's store. Abigail felt something break loose in her chest. Not fear this time, but something warmer, stronger. We're both stubborn fools, aren't we? Probably, but at least we're honest fools. She almost smiled. Almost. So we ride to Willow Creek? Tomorrow. Early. We'll make it there and back before dark if we push. That night, sitting in the kitchen after dinner, Abigail found herself watching Caleb as he read one of his books. He'd been quiet since their conversation in the barn, lost in whatever story held his attention. The lamplight made shadows on his face, highlighting the hard lines that came from years of physical labor and isolation. Can I ask you something? She said. He looked up. Go ahead. Why do you really live out here alone? And don't tell me it's just because other people aren't worth the trouble. There's more to it than that. Caleb closed his book slowly, his expression unreadable. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, My father died when I was 19. Heart gave out while he was working a fence line. By the time I found him, he'd been gone for hours. I'm sorry. Don't be. He lived the way he wanted, but after he died, people came around. Neighbors, townspeople, all of them with advice about what I should do with the ranch. Sell it, lease it, bring in a manager. They didn't think I could handle it alone, thought I was too young, too inexperienced, too much like him to make it work. So you proved them wrong. I tried to, hired some men to help. Davies was one of them, actually. He and his brother worked here for about 6 months. Caleb's jaw tightened. They were lazy, cut corners, and when I called them on it, they said I was being unreasonable, that I expected too much, that I was turning into my father, hard, cruel, impossible to please. What happened? I fired them, both of them. They went back to town and told everyone I was violent, unstable, said I'd threatened them, that they'd feared for their safety. None of it was true, but it spread, became the story everyone believed because it confirmed what they already thought about me. And you've been alone since then. Mostly, I hire day workers occasionally, but I don't bring people on permanently. Don't trust them to do the work right. Don't trust them not to turn on me when things get hard. He looked at her directly. Until you. I'm not special. I'm just desperate. You're honest. That's special enough. They sat in silence for a while. the weight of shared understanding settling between them. Two people shaped by judgment and isolation, finding something like kinship in their mutual refusal to be broken by it. "Thank you," Abigail said quietly, "for telling me. Thank you for staying, even when it would be easier to leave. Where would I go? This is the closest thing to a home I've ever had." Something crossed Caleb's face, surprise maybe, or recognition. "Yeah, I know what you mean." The ride to Willow Creek the next morning was long and hot. They took the wagon, loaded with everything they'd need to trade, and pushed the horses harder than was probably wise. Abigail had never been this far from town before, had never seen landscape that wasn't familiar, roads she hadn't walked 100 times. It felt like freedom and danger mixed together in equal measure. Willow Creek was smaller than their town, but friendlier. No one knew them here. No one cared about their story. They bought supplies from a merchant who asked no questions beyond what they needed and how they'd pay. Flour, salt, thread, coffee, sugar, dried beans. Essentials that would keep them going for months if they were careful. On the way back, as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Caleb said, "This doesn't have to be forever, you know." "What doesn't?" "The isolation, the town's anger. Eventually they'll get tired of being outraged, find something new to focus on." "You think so?" "I've seen it happen before. People have short attention spans for other people's business. Right now we're interesting, novel. But in a few months, when nothing scandalous actually happens, they'll move on. And if they don't, then we keep riding to Willow Creek for supplies, keep working the ranch, keep living our lives on our terms." He glanced at her. "Would that be so terrible?" Abigail thought about it. Really thought about it. A life on this ranch, working hard, living simply, disconnected from people who'd never wanted her anyway. It should have felt like a prison, like the worst possible outcome. Instead, it felt like possibility. "No," she said finally, "it wouldn't be terrible at all." The confrontation came 3 weeks later, on a day that started like any other. Abigail was hauling water to the vegetable garden she'd started behind the house when she heard horses, multiple horses. She looked up and felt her stomach drop. Margaret and Sarah were riding toward the ranch, but they weren't alone. Behind them came a carriage, and from it emerged Mrs. Brennan, Judge Morrison, and a man in a sheriff's uniform. Caleb appeared from the barn, his face already dark with anger. "What's this about?" The sheriff dismounted, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "Mr. Vance, we have a warrant to search the premises." "A warrant for what?" "Complaints have been filed regarding the welfare of Miss Abigail Carter. Reports suggest she may be held here against her will, subject to conditions that warrant intervention." "That's a lie," Abigail said, setting down her water buckets. "I'm here of my own choice. I've said that repeatedly." Margaret spoke up from her horse, her voice carrying false concern. "You would say that, though, wouldn't you, if you were scared of him, if he'd threatened you?" "He hasn't threatened me. He hasn't done anything wrong. Then you won't mind if we verify that," Judge Morrison said, stepping forward. "We need to search the house, particularly your living quarters, to ensure you're being treated appropriately." "You need a warrant to search my home," Caleb said coldly. "And last I checked, vague complaints don't constitute grounds for one." The sheriff pulled papers from his coat. "Got it right here. Signed by the judge this morning. Now you can cooperate, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice." Abigail looked at Caleb, saw the fury in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He was seconds away from doing something that would make everything worse. She touched his arm lightly. "Let them search," she said quietly. "They won't find anything because there's nothing to find. Let them see that." "Abigail, please, it's the only way to end this." Caleb's jaw worked, but finally he nodded. "Fine, search. But you touch anything that isn't directly relevant to your so-called investigation, and I'll have your badge, Sheriff." They swept through the house like locusts, opened every door, every drawer, looked under beds and behind furniture. Margaret and Sarah followed, their faces eager, clearly hoping to find something incriminating. Mrs. Brennan supervised with an expression of grim satisfaction. When they reached Abigail's room, the sheriff paused. It was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Bed made, few possessions neatly arranged, nothing that suggested anything inappropriate. The door had a lock on the inside. The window opened easily, There was no sign of confinement or mistreatment. Judge Morrison examined everything with careful attention, then turned to Abigail. Miss Carter, I need you to answer something honestly. Are you here because you want to be? Not because you feel obligated, not because you're afraid of the alternative, but because this is genuinely where you choose to be. Yes. Has Mr. Vance ever threatened you, harmed you, or forced you to do anything against your will? Never. Has he ever made inappropriate advances or demanded anything beyond labor in exchange for your room and wages? No, he's been nothing but professional and fair. The judge looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for lies. Then he nodded slowly. I believe you. Unfortunately, that doesn't resolve our dilemma. What dilemma? Caleb demanded. She's told you she's fine. You've searched the house and found nothing. What more do you need? The appearance of impropriety is almost as damaging as impropriety itself, Judge Morrison said heavily. Miss Carter may be here willingly, and you may be treating her appropriately. But the situation itself, an unmarried woman living with an unmarried man, it violates community standards, and I'm under pressure to address that. From who? These vultures who can't mind their own business? Mrs. Brennan stepped forward. From concerned citizens who care about the moral fabric of this community. You may not care about reputation, Mr. Vance, but the rest of us do. Then maybe the rest of you should find something more productive to care about. The law is clear on this matter, the judge said. While I can't force Miss Carter to leave if she doesn't want to, I can declare this living arrangement inappropriate and issue an order requiring changes. What kind of changes? Abigail asked, her voice tight. Either you return to proper lodging with appropriate supervision, or... The judge paused, clearly uncomfortable with what came next. Or the arrangement is made legitimate through marriage. The silence that followed was absolute. Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. Marriage. He was actually suggesting marriage as a solution to people's discomfort with her living situation. You can't be serious, Caleb said. I'm completely serious. It's the only way to resolve this within the bounds of law and propriety. Either Miss Carter leaves, or you marry her and make this arrangement legal in the eyes of the community. Margaret made a sound of disgust. You can't actually expect them to... I expect people to follow the law, Judge Morrison said sharply. And the law states that unmarried cohabitation violates decency statutes. So those are the options. Choose one by the end of the week, or I'll be forced to take more aggressive action. He left, taking the sheriff with him. Mrs. Brennan lingered, her expression triumphant. You brought this on yourself, Miss Carter. All you had to do was know your place. My place? Abigail repeated, her voice shaking with rage. You mean invisible, insignificant, grateful for whatever scraps of existence you deemed appropriate to give me. I mean safe, respectable, part of proper society instead of this. Mrs. Brennan gestured at the ranch, at Caleb, at everything Abigail had built. But you chose pride over practicality, and now you'll pay the price for that choice. The only price I'm paying is having to deal with people like you, Abigail shot back. People who'd rather tear someone down than let them succeed on their own terms, who hide cruelty behind concern and judgment behind morality. You don't care about my welfare, you care about control. And the fact that I won't give you that control drives you crazy. Mrs. Brennan's face went pale, then red. For a moment, she looked like she might strike Abigail. Instead, she turned sharply and climbed into the carriage. Margaret and Sarah followed, but not before Margaret leaned down from her horse. You think you've won something, Margaret said quietly, but look at what it's cost you, your reputation, your place in society, any chance at a normal life. Was it worth it? Was proving you're not weak worth becoming someone no decent person will associate with? Yes, Abigail said without hesitation. Because being weak and acceptable was killing me. At least now I'm alive. Margaret's expression flickered, something that might have been envy or respect or both. Then she kicked her horse and followed the carriage down the road. When they were gone, when the dust had settled and the yard was empty again, Abigail sat down hard on the porch steps. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. Caleb sat beside her, not touching, just present. They stayed like that for a long time, watching the sun move across the sky, neither of them willing to address what had just happened. Finally, Caleb said, We don't have to do what he suggested. I know. You could leave. Find work somewhere else. Just start over in a place where no one knows your story. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. This is your life, your choice. Abigail turned to look at him. Really look at him. This man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd defended her, stood beside her, refused to let the town's judgment change how he saw her, who'd become something she hadn't expected and didn't quite know how to name. What if I don't want to leave? She asked quietly. Then you stay. We figure out how to make this work without giving them what they want. And if we can't, if the judge makes good on his threat? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, there's a third option. One he didn't mention because it's too simple. What's that? I marry you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible and somehow inevitable all at once. You don't want that, Abigail said. You don't want a wife. You've built your whole life around being alone. I built my life around not being disappointed by people. That's different. And you're not people. He stopped, searching for words. You're the one person who's shown up every day and done exactly what you said you'd do, who hasn't quit or complained or expected anything beyond fair treatment. That's worth more than being alone. Marriage isn't the same as employment. I know that. But think about what it actually changes. You're already living here, already working here, already part of how this place runs. The only thing marriage adds is a piece of paper that makes the town shut up. It adds more than that. It adds expectations, obligations, things I don't think either of us are ready for. Maybe. Or maybe it just makes official what's already true, that we work better together than apart, that whatever this is, it's worth protecting. Abigail's throat felt tight. You're offering to marry me to keep me safe. That's not a real marriage. No, I'm offering to marry you because the alternative is watching you leave. And I don't want that. Haven't wanted that since the day you showed up and refused to run when I told you to. He met her eyes. This isn't about obligation or pity or any of the things you're probably thinking. It's about choosing you, deliberately, because in the past month, you've become the one constant in my life that actually matters. Caleb, you don't have to answer now. Take time. Think about what you actually want, not what you think you're supposed to want. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. He stood and walked back toward the barn, leaving Abigail alone with the biggest decision of her life. That night, she couldn't sleep. Lay in her small room staring at the ceiling, turning the question over and over in her mind. Marriage to Caleb Vance. It should have been terrifying, should have felt like trading one form of dependence for another. But it didn't. It felt like something else entirely, like partnership, like two people who didn't fit anywhere else finding a place with each other, like the natural conclusion to a story that had started as a joke and turned into something real. She thought about leaving, about what that would look like. Another town, another job, another boarding house full of strangers who'd judge her just as harshly as the ones here. Starting over with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she'd walked away from the one place she'd ever felt like she belonged. That didn't feel like freedom. It felt like surrender. She got up before dawn, dressed quickly, and found Caleb already in the barn tending to the horses. He looked up when she entered, his expression careful, guarded against hope. I've made my decision, she said. All right. I'll marry you. But not because I have to. Not because it's the practical choice, or because I'm out of options. I'll marry you because you're right. We work better together than apart. Because I trust you. And because I'd rather build something real with you than run away to something uncertain anywhere else. Caleb set down the brush he'd been using. You're sure? No, I'm terrified, but I'm sure anyway. He crossed the space between them and held out his hand. She took it, and they stood there in the early morning light, two broken people deciding to try being whole together. When? He asked. Soon. Before the judge's deadline. Before the town can come up with another way to make this impossible. Today, then. We'll ride into town, find someone to marry us, and be done with it. Just like that? Just like that. They rode into town that afternoon, both of them dressed in their work clothes because neither of them owned anything better. People stared as they passed, whispered. But Caleb kept his eyes forward and Abigail kept her spine straight, and together they walked into the courthouse like they owned the place. Judge Morrison was in his office. His eyebrows rose when he saw them. "Mr. Vance? Miss Carter? I wasn't expecting you until—" "We want to get married," Caleb interrupted. "Today. Now. Whatever it takes to make it legal." The judge blinked. "I see. Well, that's unexpected. You understand that marriage is a serious commitment, not something to be entered into lightly just to avoid legal complications?" "We understand," Abigail said firmly. "This isn't about avoiding anything. It's about making a choice, our choice." Judge Morrison studied them both, then slowly nodded. "Very well. I can perform the ceremony myself if you'd like. You'll need witnesses, though." "We'll find someone." They did. 2 clerks from the courthouse who looked confused but willing. The ceremony was short, perfunctory, nothing like the elaborate affairs Abigail had heard other girls dream about. No flowers, no music, no family watching with tears of joy, just 4 words. "Do you consent?" "I do." And then it was done. She was Abigail Vance, wife of the most feared man in the county. The girl who'd been sent to his ranch as a joke had just become the one person who legally belonged there. Judge Morrison made them sign papers, recorded the marriage in his ledger, and handed Caleb a certificate that made it official. "Congratulations. Though I have to say, this is the most unusual wedding I've ever performed." "Unusual seems about right for us," Caleb said dryly. They walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun. People had gathered on the street. Word had spread fast. Mrs. Brennan stood among them, her face white with shock. Margaret was there too, her expression unreadable. The whole town seemed to have come out to witness what they couldn't quite believe. Caleb looked at them all with cold contempt. "We're married now. Legal. Proper. Everything you said we needed to be. So you can stop your crusade. Stop your complaints. And stop pretending you gave a damn about anything except making us miserable." Hartford pushed forward from the crowd. "This is a sham. Everyone knows it. You forced her into this to avoid consequences." "He didn't force me into anything," Abigail said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "I chose this. Chose him. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because he's treated me with more respect and decency in 6 weeks than this entire town has shown me in 3 years." "You'll regret it," Mrs. Brennan said. "When the novelty wears off, when he shows his true nature, you'll see what you've done. And we won't take you back. Not after this." "Good. Because I wouldn't come back if you begged me. I'd rather spend my life with one honest man than surrounded by people who hide their cruelty behind respectability." She took Caleb's arm, and together they walked through the crowd. People parted to let them pass, their faces a mixture of shock, disgust, and something that might have been grudging respect. They rode back to the ranch in silence. When they arrived, Caleb helped her down from the wagon and said, "Nothing has to change. You keep your room, keep your space. This is just a piece of paper." "Is that what you want? For nothing to change?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. "No, but I don't want you to feel obligated to anything beyond what we agreed to." Abigail stepped closer. "What if I want things to change? What if I want this to be real?" "Is that what you want?" "I don't know yet, but I'd like the chance to find out, without expectations, without pressure. Just the possibility of something more than an arrangement." Caleb reached out slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, careful, like he was afraid she might break. "I think I'd like that too." The weeks that followed weren't easy. Marriage didn't magically solve their problems or make the town accept them. But it changed the nature of the fight. They weren't defending an improper arrangement anymore. They were defending their right to build a life on their own terms. Slowly, grudgingly, the town backed off. Not out of acceptance, but out of exhaustion. There were no more visits from judges or councils, no more threats, just cold distance and the occasional hostile stare. Abigail found she didn't mind. The isolation that had once terrified her became comfortable. She had work that mattered, a home that felt solid, and a partner who valued her not for what she could become, but for what she already was. One evening, 3 months after the wedding, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the land they worked together. Caleb had his arm around her shoulders. A new development. one that had happened gradually over weeks of small gestures and careful trust. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying me?" "No. Do you regret asking?" "Not for a second." "Even though I came here as a joke? Even though I'm not what anyone would choose if they had better options?" He pulled her closer. "You're exactly what I would choose. Strong, stubborn, honest, everything that matters. I'm not strong. I'm just too tired to keep being afraid. That's what strength is. Doing the hard thing anyway." Abigail leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, and thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The cruelty that had sent her to his ranch, the fear that had almost made her run, the desperation that had forced her to stay. All of it had led here, to this porch, to this man, to a life she'd never imagined possible. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else, for defending me when I couldn't defend myself, for believing I was worth the trouble. You were never trouble. You were the solution to a problem I didn't know I had." "What problem was that?" "Being alone without realizing how much I hated it." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to dark. Inside, the house waited, warm and lived in, no longer a monument to isolation, but a home they'd built together through work and stubbornness, and a refusal to let other people's expectations define them. 6 months later, Eleanor Pierce came to the ranch. Abigail was in the garden when the older woman's carriage pulled up, and her first instinct was to flee, but she'd stopped running a long time ago. Mrs. Pierce climbed down slowly, her movements careful, like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Mrs. Vance, I hope I'm not intruding." "That depends on why you're here." "To apologize, and to bring you this." She held out a basket covered with cloth. "It's not much. Some preserves, bread, cheese, but I wanted you to have it. Wanted you to know that not everyone in town supports what was done to you." Abigail took the basket cautiously. "You refused to sell to me, told me you couldn't afford to be seen supporting me." "I know, and I was wrong, cowardly. I let fear dictate my actions, and I've regretted it ever since." Mrs. Pierce's voice was steady but quiet. "The way this town treated you, the way we all treated you, it was shameful. You were just trying to survive, and we made that as difficult as possible because you didn't fit our narrow definition of acceptable." "Why are you telling me this now? The fight's over. We won, if you can call it that." "Because I heard something. About the boarding house. About Mrs. Brennan." Mrs. Pierce glanced back toward town. "She's been taking in more girls. Young ones. Desperate ones. And she's using what happened to you as a cautionary tale. Telling them that if they step out of line, if they try to find their own way, they'll end up like you, married to the town outcast, cut off from decent society." Abigail felt anger flash through her. "That's what she thinks happened? That I'm some kind of warning?" "Yes, but some of those girls, they're not hearing the warning she thinks she's giving. They're hearing about a woman who stood up to the entire town and won, who chose her own path and made it work. You're becoming something Mrs. Brennan never intended, an inspiration." "I'm not inspiring, I'm just stubborn." "Sometimes that's the same thing." Mrs. Pierce smiled slightly. "I wanted you to know that what you did mattered, not just for you, but for other girls who thought they had no choice but to accept whatever scraps of life they were given." After Mrs. Pierce left, Abigail sat in the garden for a long time, thinking about the girls at the boarding house, about the ones who would come after, about whether her story would help them or hurt them. That night she told Caleb about the visit. "Does it bother you?" he asked. "Being used as an example?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to tell them the truth, that this life is hard, that choosing yourself comes with costs, that marriage to escape judgment isn't the same as marriage for love. And the other part? The other part wants them to know that it's possible, that you don't have to accept the life other people plan for you, that being uncomfortable is better than being invisible." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know what I think the real difference is between us now and us 6 months ago?" "What?" "This isn't just about escaping judgment anymore. Somewhere along the way, it became real. We became real." Abigail looked at him, this man who'd been a stranger, then an employer, then a reluctant ally, and now something deeper that she was still learning to name. "When did that happen?" For me? The day you told the judge you were choosing to stay, that you weren't leaving even though it would be easier. That's when I knew you weren't just surviving here. You were living here, and I wanted to be part of that life. And for me, Abigail said slowly, it was the night you told me about your father, about why you work alone, when you let me see the hurt under the anger. That's when you stopped being the scary man from town stories and became just Caleb, someone real. He reached for her hand. So what do we tell those girls at the boarding house? The ones who are looking at our story and trying to figure out what it means for them. We tell them the truth, that choosing yourself is hard, that it costs something, but that being yourself, really, truly yourself, is worth the price, even when the price is everything you thought you wanted. A year after their wedding, Abigail stood in the barn she'd cleaned on that first terrifying day and realized she couldn't remember what fear felt like anymore. Not the deep, consuming fear that had defined most of her life. She could remember being afraid, could recall the sensation intellectually, but she couldn't feel it. What she felt instead was solid, grounded, real. The ranch prospered, not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. They worked together, building something neither of them could have managed alone. The town slowly, grudgingly, began to thaw. A few people started nodding when they passed on the street. The general store quietly resumed selling to them, though Mrs. Pierce never quite met Abigail's eyes when she did. It wasn't acceptance. Not really, but it was tolerance. And after everything, that was enough. Margaret showed up one afternoon, alone this time, her expression stripped of its usual cruelty. "Can we talk?" she asked. They sat on the porch, the same porch where Abigail had once sat trembling, waiting to be thrown off the property. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of them. "I'm leaving," Margaret said abruptly. "The boarding house, the town, all of it." "Where will you go?" "East. There's a teaching position in a girls' school. It's not much, but it's mine, my own money, my own life. Not dependent on Mrs. Brennan's charity or anyone's approval." "Good for you." Margaret looked at her sharply. "You mean that?" "Why wouldn't I?" "Because I was terrible to you for years. Made your life harder just because I could, because it was entertaining. You were surviving the only way you knew how," Abigail said. "Same as me. You just chose cruelty instead of invisibility. I chose wrong." "Maybe. But you're choosing different now. That counts for something." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Margaret said, "I came here to apologize. To tell you I'm sorry for sending you to this ranch as a joke. For the rock and the food. For all of it. I know. And to thank you." That surprised her. "For what?" "For showing me it was possible. To leave. To choose something different. I watched you stand up to everyone, the judge, the town, even Caleb in the beginning, and I thought you were insane. Throwing away any chance at a normal life for this." She gestured at the ranch. "But then I saw you a few months later, and you looked happy. Actually happy. Not pretending, not surviving. Happy. I am happy. I know, and it made me realize I've never been happy a day in my life. Just comfortable, accepted. But comfort isn't the same as contentment. Acceptance isn't the same as belonging." Margaret stood. "So thank you for being brave enough to show the rest of us what choice looks like." After she left, Caleb came out and sat beside Abigail. That looked intense. She apologized and thanked me at the same time. How do you feel about that? Hopeful. If Margaret can change, can choose something better, maybe there's hope for all of us. You already chose something better. So did you. He pulled her close, and she leaned into him, solid and warm and steady. This man who'd become her partner in every sense that mattered, who challenged her and protected her and saw her for exactly who she was. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd run that first day?" he asked. "If you'd listened to your fear and left before I even knew you were there?" "Sometimes. But then I remember, I did almost run. I was seconds away from it, and the only reason I didn't was because I realized running would cost me everything. And now? Now I have everything. Not the everything I thought I wanted when I was younger, but the everything that actually matters. Work that means something, a home that's mine, a partner who... She stopped, searching for words. Who what? Who I love. Even though I didn't think I was capable of it. Even though it snuck up on me so gradually I didn't notice until it was already there. Caleb was very still. Say that again. I love you. Is that okay? Are we allowed to say that? I don't know what we're allowed, but I know what I feel, and I feel the same way. Have for months. Just didn't know if you wanted to hear it. I do. I really do. They kissed on that porch in the fading light, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something real from the wreckage of everyone else's expectations. Years later, when people asked Abigail about her life, about how she ended up married to Caleb Vance on that isolated ranch, she never knew quite what to say. The real story was too complicated, too messy, too full of fear and desperation and choices made for the wrong reasons that somehow turned out right. So she usually just smiled and said, I went to work one day and decided to stay. And that was true enough. The rest, the cruelty that sent her there, the terror of those first weeks, the town's campaign to break them, the marriage born of necessity that became something real, all of that was theirs. Their private history, their foundation. They never had children, never needed them. The ranch was their legacy. The work was their purpose. Each other was enough. Sometimes former boarding house girls would show up, desperate and afraid, looking for work or just a place to rest. Abigail always gave it to them, fed them, listened to their stories, sent them on their way with money in their pockets and the knowledge that survival was possible. That choosing yourself, even when everyone said you were making a mistake, wasn't the end of the world. It was the beginning. The town eventually forgot why it had been angry, forgot the scandal, forgot everything except that Caleb and Abigail Vance ran a good ranch, paid their debts, and kept to themselves. They became part of the landscape, expected, normal, which would have been funny if it wasn't so perfect. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the sun painted the sky in colors too beautiful to name, Abigail would sit on that porch with Caleb and think about the girl she used to be, the one who'd been sent to this ranch as entertainment, the one everyone expected to fail. That girl was gone, had been gone for years. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who'd fought for her right to exist on her own terms, who'd turned a joke into a life worth living. She'd become the one person no one could break, not because she was strong in the way people usually meant it, but because she'd learned that breaking and rebuilding were part of the same process, that scars were just proof you'd survived, that the opposite of fear wasn't courage, it was choice. And she'd chosen well.